Why don't you just tell us that you'll approve our trip to go to Danbury?
That approval rests with the department. We have a long-standing process of reviewing.
You lead the department. There's not some other person. You're the head of the department. Why can't you just say we can go?
Did the fact that the House Oversight Committee subpoenaed Mr. Galanis' business partner have any weight on the decision to deny his request?
No.
But for the longest period of time I've ever had my hand shaken. Big man. Anyway.
You remember telling me that Peter Navarro was too notorious when I wanted to interview him during his incarceration.
Congressman, we had a long conversation about your desire to have us help facilitate Mr. Strand to appear on your podcast.
Nope. This is Navarro. So I'm asking about Mr. Navarro. Do you remember telling me he was too notorious?
Oh, sorry. Congressman, yes.
Okay, all right. So I want to get into how you determine that an inmate is too notorious for an interview or not too notorious for an interview. What is the standard that you apply?
So, Congressman, I think it's really important for the committee to understand that the request was about him appearing on a podcast. It wasn't about facilitating a meeting with the two of you, which my office followed up and said we would clearly facilitate. And there's only one avenue, as we talked about in our policy, around being able to appear on a podcast, and that's our media policy. And you, with your personal podcasts, that is not
it's my official
media.
podcast. So members of Congress do podcasts to function as video newsletters to tell the American people what's going on. So I wanted to interview Navarro. You said he was too notorious. You've acknowledged that was the basis. So I want to know now what test you apply to determine that someone is or is not too notorious.
Again, Congressman, while I shared that information with you in a one-on-one briefing, the crux of the denial was that we were not able to help facilitate an incarcerated individual to appear on a podcast.
No, that wasn't what you said. You said it was, you acknowledge it was this notoriety factor. And the reason I ask is because Michael Avenatti gave an interview from federal prison. So I guess, why is it that Michael Avenatti is authorized to do an interview from federal prison, but Peter Navarro isn't?
Congressman, I met with you to be as helpful as possible to discuss.
That wasn't helpful. No, because here's what it looks like, okay? You've acknowledged that the reason you didn't let me interview Navarro was because you said he was too notorious. And then I've spent more than a minute trying to get you to explain what the test is for that notoriety. And you can't explain one. You just keep going back to, well, we couldn't facilitate you and we're trying to be helpful. That wasn't helpful. And when you have standards that are subject to just any interpretation you want, then you carry with the entire Bureau the belief that you guys are just being arbitrary. Because when John Gotti is allowed to do an interview from federal prison and Peter Navarro isn't, it's hard to ascertain how Gotti would be less notorious. And it just sort of it animates the concern that you heard expressed by the chairman, whether it's Galanis or Navarro or Bannon or whomever, that you guys are trying to make it harder on people who are expressing views that you don't particularly like. And so, that's going to be a problem. We're going to have to put into law or oversight or something the ability to get to these people, because we're not going to accept just you making a determination that Avenatti's not too notorious, but Navarro is. So you heard the chairman say in his opening remarks that we want to go to Danbury Prison in Connecticut, and we want to go there to see Mr. Bannon. So is there going to be any problem in the next few weeks approving a visit with the chairman of this committee to go to Danbury?
As the congressman and I talked about during a one-on-one conversation yesterday, and as I will say to the committee, we will be happy to review that request and make that accommodation as you submit that request to the Office of Legislative Affairs.
Okay, I appreciate the commitment to review it, but are you committing to approve it?
Congressman, those approvals actually happen through the Office of Legislative Affairs. I can't foresee an issue with the approval of that. But
this is a legislative affair. You're testifying before your Oversight Subcommittee. So why don't you just tell us that you'll approve our trip to go to Danbury?
That approval rests with the department. We have a long-standing process of reviewing.
You lead the department. There's not some other person. You're the head of the department. Why can't you just say we can go?
We have a long-standing process of those requests being reviewed by the department, and I will encourage my team to work closely with the department in reviewing that request.
That is just a total non-answer. I mean, this is what we get, Mr. Chairman. This is what we get. Arbitrary standards, non-answers, And frankly, if we continue to fund it and tolerate, it's all we're going to get.
The women at that prison remain in need of supervision, protection, and a sense of what their futures would look like. They've already endured so much, and it's your job to ensure that no additional harm comes to them. Many of these women held at FCI Dublin have family members and loved ones who are concerned for their physical safety and their emotional well-being. What steps were taken to screen for histories of misconduct among the temporary staff BOP brought to FCI Dublin to facilitate the transfer of adults in custody?
Thank you, Congresswoman. There was a review by the regional directors to ensure that the people we were sending to have additional eyes and ears in that facility during that closure were the appropriate people. We also brought in additional members from the regional office to have that oversight as well. Safety and security of those women and fear of even perceived retaliation during that move was top of mind for us.
Thank you. And what oversight is occurring to ensure that women are being treated humanely during their transfer process?
So on a variety of levels, we sent out clear messages to the wardens that they would have direct eyes and ears and watching these women as they arrived in their receiving institutions to ensure that they had the medical care, the mental health care, access to counsel, access to their family. You're right, we were worried about their families as well. We also have an individual that has been the liaison with our SAFER teams from the department, from the Office of the Deputy Attorney General, and she too is keeping watch on these individuals, so we have someone in central office paying attention.
Derek Chauvin in a Tucson facility was stabbed. Derek Chauvin in a Tucson facility was stabbed 22 times while he was copying documents. What happened?
Congressman, excuse me. I won't be able to speak to the details of that situation for obvious reasons, but I will tell you that the safety of all individuals in our custody is what we do every day. That's our mission. That's our focus.
So the gang member that stabbed him 22 times seems now to have full access to being able to, for example, copy documents, stuff like that, while Mr. Chauvin is not allowed that privilege currently. Why would there be disparate treatment like that?
Congressman, I wouldn't be able to speak to the specifics of Mr. Chauvin's incarceration or the assailant. What I can tell you is that we have experts who make housing determinations and placements to ensure that people are safe and secure, both the individuals that were assaulted and the assailants.
Are you aware that Jason Galanis reported to Bureau of Prisons chaplain that he was the victim of repeated incidents of sexual harassment at the hands of BOP staff?
I am familiar with Mr. Galanis' allegations, yes.
Is that staff member who assaulted Mr. Galanis, is he still working for Bureau of Prisons?
Again, that's an ongoing investigation, and I wouldn't be able to speak to the alleged individual's circumstances right now.
You know, Mr. Chairman, this is really I've just been here 4 short years. This is really one of the frustrating things. When people come before this committee, whether it's the FBI, the Department of Justice, whomever, we rarely get answers. And you can see why the American people are losing faith in some of our institutions when we can't even get answers to some of these things.
And what is your short-term and long-term plan to increase the number of correctional officers to meet the needs of the system?
Thank you for the question. We have done so many things. We've used every incentive that we have at our fingertips, both recruitment and retention incentives. We've changed how we're marketing and trying to hire our correctional officers. We increased correctional officers' base salary by $2,000. We waived the maximum age entry, from 37 to 39. We pay a $1,000 recruitment bonus to any employee that successfully recruits someone and brings them onto the Bureau. And as of May 2024, we received direct hire authority for our correctional officers nationwide, which has proven very successful. And then, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I think the primary focus is really that base salary and working with the department and OPM for a special salary rate.
Director, how many federal inmates were released to home confinement under the CARES Act?
We had about 35,000 released under the CARES Act.
35,000?
Oh, excuse me, 35,000 is the number under FSA earned time credits. Under CARES Act, it was 13,000.
13, that's what I thought.
13,204.
13,000. On February 4th, 2023, Jason Galanis, after serving approximately 40% of his sentence, applied for home confinement. Very next month, the probation office approved that. You're familiar with that, right? Also, the very next month, March of 2023, the Pensacola warden approved. And then on June 9th, the Residential Reentry Management Center also approved Mr. Galanis for home confinement under the CARES Act. But then, 4 days later, the Board of Prisons denied it. Who made the decision to deny that?
The denial came out of the Residential Reentry Management Office.
After they approved it, 4 days later, they changed their mind?
So the chair and I spoke yesterday. I think there's some confusion around approvals and referrals. The warden has the ability to refer. Probation has the requirement to confirm that his housing option in the community is proper. That still doesn't approve a home confinement placement. The decision rests with the Residential Reentry Management Office.
And they told Mr. Galanis on the 9th that everything was fine. And then on the 13th, they changed. Why?
That is not my understanding. The Residential Reentry Management Office did a thorough review of his case and concluded that he was, for a variety of indicators, would not be a good candidate for home confinement.
The Residential Reentry Management Center on June 9th approved Mr. Galanis' request for home confinement and then reached out to the Southern District of New York where he was prosecuted. Is that what happened?
That's not my understanding. My understanding is since he had more than 5 years on his sentence, it was practice for the Residential Reentry Management Office to reach out to the U.S.
Anyone
Attorney.
else get CARES Act release and home confinement under the CARES Act who had more than 5 years left on their sentence?
I can't answer that question
I can. David
definitively,
McMaster
but I
did.
can tell
David
you.
McMaster did. In sentence for fraud, similar to Mr. Galanis, had a 188-month sentence and was given home confinement under the CARES Act.
We look at each case individually. I am confident that
Okay,
Mr.
so
Galanis' case.
this is what I'm getting at. What was the reason, whether it was an approval then a denial, what was the reason for the denial?
So it was a handful of reasons, and we look at the totality of the circumstances when we make
When you
these
say
decisions.
we, who ultimately makes the decisions? Does that rest with you?
No, sir. I do not review these.
Can you overrule it?
This is the residential.
Can you overrule what happens at the Residential Reentry Management Center?
I have never overruled one of their
Never.
decisions.
Okay. Then what were the factors that made this determination?
So the factors included the fact that in a previous incarceration cycle, he violated the conditions of his supervised release by texting a potential witness, and his bond was ultimately revoked. His role in the instant offense as a leader and organizer was outlined in the pre-sentencing report. As was mentioned earlier, he owed over $80 million in restitution. He had more than 10 victims and more than 5 years
How many
left
were
on his
turned down?
sentence.
The people who applied under the CARES Act, you gave approval to 13,204. How many were denied?
I don't have that number, but we're happy to look into it and get it back.
Is it a big number? Is it a small number? What's the number?
You know, Congressman, I wouldn't venture a guess under oath. I will tell you that towards the end of CARES Act, the number of requests that came in, I'm told, tripled as the population learned that the CARES Act was expiring. So I know at the time of his request, the numbers were very high.
Did the fact that the House Oversight Committee subpoenaed Mr. Galanis' business partner have any weight on the decision to deny his request?
No.
Did you say that 35,000 people were released as a result of the First Steps Act?
That's correct.
The safety valve program, which also restricts or allows judges in nonviolent crimes to allow criminals, or at least people who have been convicted, a little earlier release, has that been helpful in lowering prison population and crowding?
You know, our prison population is continuing to climb ever so slightly, even though we have some of these tools at our disposal.
You know, in Alabama, I think we spoke about this last time. I'm a proponent of prison reform and certainly sentencing reform, and we have a prison in Alabama that actually teaches skills. And so when the inmates come out, they're certified welders, diesel mechanics, all the above. The recidivism rate is lowered dramatically, and so I always encourage us to look at those kind of programs. And concerning Mr. Galanis, I didn't realize that he had 8 business partners. I think Hunter Biden had 8 business partners, and Mr. Galanis was one of the 8 that got sentenced. Hunter did not get charged with anything, is my understanding. And that's the problem, I think, and we talked about this with Merrick Garland, is sometimes it seems like certain people, justice is not truly blind, and that's been a concern for us. And certainly with Mr. Galanis being a partner with Mr. Biden and us trying to get information concerning the impeachment process, you understand how we're concerned when he's denied after he's approved, and then all of a sudden we send a subpoena and they go, oh, by the way, you've been denied. Do you think in any way that sometimes politics gets into part of the prisons?
Congressman, no. We are to uphold the letter of the law and our policies, and politics should not be taken into account when we're making those decisions.
Well, under the First Step Act, which we just talked a little about, certain incarcerated individuals are meant to be able to earn time credits for participating in recidivism reduction programs. Our productive activities, which can be later applied towards early release, we've been informed by the BOP that it is not processing, or it is at this time it's not processing these earned credits, leaving inmates, including Jason Galanis, in the dark regarding his status through the First Step Act. What is the BOP doing to rectify the implementation of the First Step Act to ensure that individuals like Mr. Galanis are receiving proper treatment under the law?
So the automation of the earned time credits have proven very effective. It really allows for transparency with the adults in custody now. So now they know they have a projected date on if they stay in program, if they continue to engage in positive behavior, that those earned time credits are there.
So why are we keeping the prisoners in the dark on these? I think in some ways that's a carrot that we can say, hey, you're at this point, we could move you along a little, you're making great progress. I mean, we always want to encourage folks who are trying to make the effort to correct their path. Any reason why we're keeping certain inmates or inmates in dark on this?
Congressman, you and I are aligned on this. I'm a behaviorist by training, and it's absolutely a carrot, which is why we have changed the practice now. So now they're not in the dark. Now we're doing the automated projective earned time credits, and they're able to see that carrot, if you will.
When did y'all begin that?
We have been working on automated time credits for over a year, and it's been in the last few months that we've been doing the projected earned time credits.
What are the top things that the Bureau is doing or can do, especially if you had the resources, to aid inmates with mental health issues and substance use?
Thank you, Congressman. You're absolutely right, and the numbers that you mentioned reflect what's in my recall. Large number of individuals suffer from mental health issues and alcohol and drug addictions. Many of those are drivers to incarceration.
Yes.
And so it's really our job to focus on getting them healthy, both physically and mentally, before they come back and become our good neighbors. So all of our institutions have doctoral level psychiatrists, or psychologists, and we have 500 psychologists and approximately 600 treatment specialists across the country who focus on this alone, as well as residential and non-residential alcohol and drug treatment.
90% of the people who are in custody in the federal system will be released.
That's correct.
I mean, that's why we're here, and that is why it's important. And you inherited a mess. I mean, you inherited a mess. But we walked through, and I think, and there's not a lot of great stories over the last 5 years, but I think there are some, and I think it can also help. The CARES Act recidivism rate was 3.7%. That's roughly 10% of BOP at large. And it's statistically no different than traditional home confinement. Are my numbers accurate?
The recidivism rate for CARES Act was about 4.4% is what I have, yes.
So, and recidivism rate for First Step Act is about 35 to 37% lower than the BOP at large?
That's correct.
So, I mean, these programs work. And I think, so when we're talking about staffing, and I'm going to ask about the OPM salary thing in a second, because there's another side to this, right? What percentage of people who you hire are gone within the first year? Do you know?
You know, I don't have that number, but it is an area of concern because we were able to onboard in 2022, but we onboarded fewer than left. So the good news for this year so far is that we've onboarded 1,400, and it's more than have left.
Once they leave the Bureau of Prisons and they go to these programs which are available to them, Bureau of Prisons is totally out. Y'all don't have any, you don't give them any money to have an opportunity to buy some things when they get out, or any credits?
We encourage people to save money on their account for reentry purposes, and but when they're in the residential reentry center or on home confinement, they're still sentenced to the Bureau, so they're still under our custody, which is why it's a great step down. It isn't until their sentence expires that then we hand them off to pretrial for supervision, or probation for supervision.
On Saturday, I went to Payne's Barbecue in Memphis, and a man came up to me, and after shaking my hand for the longest period of time I've ever had my hand shaken, big man. Anyway, he came up to me afterwards at lunch, and he said, I just spent 15 years in the federal system, and I want to start a reentry program. How does somebody start a reentry program for federal prisoners?
So they would be able to reach out to our procurement staff and be able to share kind of what their reentry idea is, and our procurement staff would be able to point them in the right direction.
So they go to the federal correctional facility in Memphis?
No, I would refer them to our procurement staff at headquarters.
Can you talk about how you calculate those earned time credits for persons who were in prison at the time the First Step Act passed?
Yes, so originally when the First Step Act passed, it was a manual calculation, which caused a lot of labor and a lot of confusion amongst the population. So we have now automated the earned time credits. And just recently, in the previous months, not only have we automated the earned time credits, we're actually projecting out what their release date might be, as we talked about earlier, as a carrot, so that people understand if they continue to engage in programming and treatment, if they continue to have good conduct inside the institution, then they know what their earliest release could be. You mentioned how many people are released and the recidivism rate. Under the First Step Act, we've already released over 35,000 individuals with a recidivism rate of just 9.7%. So you're correct, it is working.
Would you share with us your perspective on what has been done to ensure this type of treatment of female inmates doesn't reoccur?
I think it starts exactly where you're at, employee accountability. And for the record, I'd like to say the supermajority of our employees come to work every day doing the right thing, are ethical, and are as disappointed as you and I are when people engage in this type of egregious misconduct. So the realignment that you talk about, the additional staff that we brought on, is working. We've closed, since August of 22, when I started, we've closed over 9,500 open matters in the Office of Internal Affairs. We have seen more prosecutions. There are still investigations pending out of Dublin. We may see more. I've worked very closely with the U.S. attorneys, as has the Deputy Attorney General, to ensure that they're prosecuting these cases. The importance of holding people accountable is so important. And then we've done so many other things. We work closely with the Inspector General, who is engaged in unannounced visits. The Office of the Deputy Attorney General has created safer teams that have now visited every single one of our female facilities. We've done cultural assessments now at all of our female facilities to see if we can see warning signs, so we don't ever get to a place again where we have a culture that is as egregious as the one at Dublin. And as I mentioned earlier, I am pleased with the passage of the Oversight Act, which will shepherd forward more announced and unannounced visits from the Inspector General, because I truly believe we can't do this work alone.
This committee is adjourned.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, members.